Welcome to a special edition of the Darden Admissions Podcast. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and you are listening to a new episode. So this is a very exciting episode. We are on the eve of the Venture Capital Conference here at the Darden School. And in honor of the occasion, we invited two second-year students in our full-time MBA class of 2024, Malcolm Stewart and Ellie Jameson, onto the podcast to talk more about venture capital at Darden. I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. As always, if this conversation is helpful to you, please like this episode and subscribe so you never miss an update. And remember, you can always check the episode description for links to Darden blogs, social channels, and more. So now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Malcolm Stewart and Ellie Jameson. Malcolm, Ellie, welcome back to the podcast. Great to have you here.
Great to be here.
Yeah, thank you both. How's everything going? Malcolm, how are you doing?
I'm good. I was just telling Ellie when we hopped on here that I fortunately only have one class this quarter. I'm taking venture capital leadership, and then I'm doing a couple independent studies and things like that. So course load is smaller than usual, which is definitely pretty exciting this time of year.
All right. How about you, Ellie? How's your fourth quarter going?
It's going really well. I also have a lighter load this quarter, more than one class, but I have three, and I've got impact investing today, so I'm excited.
All right. Well, thank you both for taking some time out for the podcast. You've both been on the podcast before, separate episodes. Encourage our listeners to go back and check those out. But this episode is going to be all about the upcoming Venture Capital Conference, which is actually taking place this Friday, April 12th, here in Roslyn, Sam's Family Grounds. Malcolm, based on your experience at Darden, how do you explain venture capital to people who are curious about this industry?
Yeah, I think trying to break it down to layman's terms is helpful. I know when I first got my understanding of it, I found that very easy rather than getting into the weeds. And so the way I'd put it is I think about venture capital in terms of usually very early stage investment in companies that are taking them from a idea to some sort of product or marketable service, and then all the way up to hopefully a full-fledged company down the road. And so a lot of times with venture capital, it can start as early as like a pre-seed stage where you're investing in a company just right out the get-go, or it can go even as late as later stages after C, D, and E, where you're raising larger portions of capital. But at its bare bones, it's really finding and funding the ideas and innovators and leaders that are really making innovative products and services that can be used across different markets.
All right, thank you for that, Malcolm. And for listeners who are still learning about this, when there's fundraising stages, they're typically A, B, C, D, et cetera, labeled as such, as Malcolm referred to. Ellie, how do you explain venture capital to people who are curious about it?
Yeah, I mean, very much along the line of what Malcolm just said. It's investments in private companies. So, everyday people who can invest in the stock market and public equities do not have access to these type of investments. They really come through venture capital firms, private equity firms, and they have access to these private startups that are most likely high growth. But as Malcolm said, they can be as early as just an idea stage, so no product and no service.
All right. And I'm curious about what you've been engaged with around venture capital during your time here at Darden. So Ellie, any activities come to mind when you think about venture capital at Darden?
Yes, absolutely. So I have been fortunate enough to serve as the president of the Entrepreneurship and Venture Capital Club. And through the club, we've had a numerous amount of speakers come. We had a wonderful speaker from Bessemer Ventures come last year. We've had a speaker from First Round Capital that came and spoke to the club in the fall. And on top of that, we have every Friday in the fall, VC Fridays, which is a learning series that a venture professor, Les Alexander, puts on to really teach the basics of venture capital. On top of that, we have VC Boot Camp that prepares students for the venture capital conference that happens in January, where students put together teams of 5 and they compete locally at Darden, and then the winning teams are sent to the Northeast Conference. So lots of venture activities happening at Darden. There's always time for students to meet with Les and other venture professors, and there's just a lot going on.
Yeah, for listeners who are curious about this topic, venture capital at Darden, we actually had Les Alexander on an office hours episode, which is our faculty spotlight series. Encourage you to also check out that conversation. Les is very much involved in the venture capital conference that will be taking place here in Roslyn in the coming days. Ellie, quick question about the activities, the Entrepreneurship and Venture Capital Club. Where do you get the speakers from? How do you find these people to come and talk to the club?
Absolutely. So many of them are UVA or Darden alumni. So there is a lot of cold outreach from the club board and club members. And then many times we get outreach from alumni who are passing through town, or just interested in giving back to current students and wanting to make those connections within the industry.
That's awesome. And I assume these virtual presentations, or do some of them come back to Charlottesville?
Yeah, it's a good mix. I would say 50-50. Things have been leaning more in person recently, which is always exciting. I think there's a better energy to the conversation when the person can actually be there in person. And oftentimes they stay for lunch or just to grab coffee afterwards, which is wonderful for the students.
Malcolm, when you think of venture capital at Darden, what kind of activities come to mind? How have you been engaged around this topic?
Yeah, so Ellie really hit the nail on the head, which checks to given that she is president of the EVC club, and naming all of the various activities. I've been fortunate enough to be a part of most of those, including the conference coming up this weekend, the VC boot camp, the venture capital learning series, which was really helpful last year. The only other one I'd add in there that I believe Ellie and I both were a part of is the Darden Venture Fellows program. And so that program is one where we're able to apply into kind of these different venture funds that have all more or less told Darden they will be able to take students for positions. And so we apply into that program, and it kind of helps us to find a venture capital internship that we can engage in. The only other activity I'd mention is because Ellie is being humble, she is also a founder of a company. And so she is actually participating on the founder side of venture capital and learning about how to start a company and run a business like that.
Yeah, Ellie, I'm going to come back and ask you about how things are going with Play Henry. So I'll put a pin in that, so to speak. But Malcolm, I want to stick with this Darden Venture Fellows program. How does that work? I mean, is it hard to find a venture capital internship? Is it helpful to have these kind of structured opportunities? Tell us a little bit more about the program and the value that it offers for students.
Yeah, it's a great question because in the venture capital space, especially on the East Coast versus the West Coast, so obviously most VC and a lot of the major funds are either in San Francisco or New York City. And so if you're looking into the venture space more on the East Coast, it's less of a concentrated space to get into. And so it really emphasizes networking and finding opportunities kind of off the beaten path. And so one of the ways the Darden Venture Fellows program helps that is they've already consolidated some of the alumni who are at different venture private equity firms that are in the area or even around the country. And through applying into the Darden Venture Fellows program, it allows for each of these funds that have a relationship with Darden to look at that application, get to know those students, and kind of then bring them in for an interview. And it helps to kind of make that a little bit easier, getting your foot in the door rather than having to try and network your own off of LinkedIn or through your own personal network, which typically is the path you would have to take to find a lot of these opportunities, because otherwise it's a lot harder to really discover them. You'll rarely see a lot of postings from some of these smaller firms. So it's really down to word of mouth and knowing people in the space to be able to find an opportunity. And the Darden Venture Fellows program really helps to circumvent that and give students opportunities in those spaces.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I will say we talked to some students here on the podcast who are interested in venture capital, and they really emphasize that networking piece, how important relationship development is, getting out there, talking to people, just continuing to build your network. It takes a lot of legwork because these opportunities are not typically as structured as some of the others that are available to MBA candidates. So it's kind of a natural segue here to my next question, which is Malcolm, how do you feel like Darden prepares students for a career in venture capital?
Yeah, so I think on a multitude of factors. One is all the educational resources that Ellie and I have mentioned already have been really helpful. I think two, obviously the coursework. There are a couple of classes that are specifically structured to this topic. One of them is taught by Elena Lutskina, which is venture capital and private equity. It's one of the best classes at Darden that you can take. And it really goes into the actual differences between all the different fundraising types and stages for venture capital and private equity. It's kind of a must take if you are interested in the space. And then there's Les Alexander's class that is focused on venture capital leadership, which is more of the understanding the ideas and thought process behind why you might make certain decisions, why you might choose to work with certain different types of venture funds and the structures. And there are a couple other classes scattered throughout in the curriculum that are helpful for that. But then the kind of intangible thing that I think you get in a less structured way is actually, to your point, the networking side of things. I think a lot of business schools, and especially Darden, they're structured in a way where you're going to have opportunities to meet and talk to lots of alumni across very different industries. And I think UVA's position and Darden's position being right here in Charlottesville, next to the University of Virginia endowment, UVMCO, which is one of the top endowments in the world, there's naturally actually a pretty bustling venture capital scene in the area. And so students, by having access to that UVA network and the Darden network, are able to then kind of tap into that and use that as a jumping off board to get to know other people in the venture space. I know that was incredibly helpful for me as I went through my resources to try and figure out where I wanted to be, where I could work, and talking to people who had been in the space for years who were willing to pick up the phone simply because we had that UVA brand name behind us.
Quick question, Malcolm, for folks who are less familiar with the Darden network or the UVA network, what's the response that you typically get as a Darden student when you reach out to alums?
Usually, if you cold email or direct message on LinkedIn or something, a UVA alum, and say, hey, I'm a current Darden student, or UVA, Ellie and I both are double who's, you will almost 100% of the time get a response. I like to say that UVA alums are some of the most loyal in the country when it comes to alma maters. And so you'll find a lot of times that people are just so excited to get to talk to someone who in their mind is living out the experience that they had several years before. And so it's a really big sense of pay it forward and pay it back. And I know I'm reached out to a lot by undergrads who are interested in maybe coming to Darden, or students who are prospective students to either UVA as a whole or the Darden School of Business who are willing to reach out. And I always make an effort to immediately respond because so many people have done that for me.
I appreciate that. It is a very responsive network, but I was interested to hear it directly from students who are doing all this networking and engaging with alums. So, Ellie, how do you feel like? Obviously, Malcolm's talked about a number of resources, a number of classes that are available. Anything else you would add to this conversation, this question around, how Darden prepares students for careers in venture capital?
I think the only other thing that I would add, just outside of Darden helping with networking within the industry, is I think Darden also just teaches networking as a basic, networking between professors and students, other students and students. And the community here is so rich and engaging that you're constantly relationship building and you're constantly meeting new people. And I think that is such an important skill if you're interested in getting into venture.
I appreciate that. Sometimes people have a pretty visceral response to this idea of networking, and they think of it as transactional. And oh gosh, I'm asking someone for something. If you heard somebody verbalize that to you, how would you push back on them, or how would you offer a different perspective?
Yeah, I would really just say networking is relationship building. You're just talking to another person. I think if you approach a conversation always as what can I offer to this conversation, that doesn't necessarily always need to be tangibles. I think that that's an easier way to approach networking than it's transactional. It's because I need something from them, because many times you'll approach a conversation and leave with something that you never thought, you would gain from that conversation or that future relationship. So I really would just approach it as you're talking and meeting someone new.
Yeah, so much of the networking you're doing is really kind of on the informational networking level, where you're just trying to learn about someone's story, how they got to where they are, advice they might have for someone who's looking to work at that firm or any particular industry, any recommendations of conversations, people that they think you should connect with beyond this conversation. It's kind of more exploratory than transactional. So, Ellie, I'm wondering, what advice would you have for prospective students who are listening to this conversation, perhaps interested in venture capital and looking at Darden?
Yeah, absolutely. I always recommend reaching out to people with one common connection. So whether that be your undergrad or Darden or business school in general, I think people are so much more generous with their time than you think. And then if you're sending a cold outreach or a cold email, I would always just ask for 10 to 15 minutes of their time and state a very specific reason for the conversation. It can absolutely be informational. I'm just learning, looking to learn more about your firm. I'm really interested in your industry focus, things like that. But start sending emails. Do not be offended if you don't hear back. Always follow up once. And I think people are a lot more generous with their time than you think.
Yeah, I appreciate that point about a specific ask. Even prospective students who are looking at business school, we encourage them to be specific if they're going to reach out to a Darden alum. Actually ask for a phone call as opposed to send a really long email with a lot of bulleted questions. Phone calls are a lot easier for really busy people. And to your point, you're not asking for 30 minutes, you're asking for 10 or 15 minutes because these folks have very, very full schedules. They still want to make time for you, but you kind of have to respect the fact that they have a lot going on. I appreciate that advice. Malcolm, same question for you. Advice for prospective students interested in plugging in to venture capital here at Darden.
Yeah, I would say it's never too early, to Ellie's point, to start building that network. If you know this is a space that you're interested in, then when you're whatever role that you're in now, wherever you are in the world, try to start kind of trying to plug into it. For if someone's a student in a school where they have a program like a small venture fund, like UVA, we have the Cav Angels program. I actually only recently found out that as a student, you can actually join a student level of that where you can attend some of their pipeline calls. You can get educational information. It's all free just by being a student at UVA. And I know that there are several other colleges across the country that have similar types of venture investing programs. So being able to network and talk to the people that are already around you is a great way to be able to grow that network base, to grow your knowledge of it, so that then when you start knocking on doors trying to get jobs, you have more to speak to. I think that the other thing that I would offer as advice is learn, read, listen to podcasts. There's so much out there that you can dial into to kind of get to know more. I listen to a series of like 7 or 8 different podcasts every single day just to kind of keep myself in the know of what's happening in the space, what's happening in the world, so that I know what to kind of look for, where opportunities might be, so that when I'm having any conversation with someone, I can be knowledgeable about things that they might be more of experts on. And then I can have more educated questions to ask. And that will always help to move the needle. There's just so much information out there that we can gather now in a way that we couldn't 15, 20, 25, or even 50 years ago. That makes it so that you can learn a lot without having to actually be on the job. And I think taking advantage of that is something that students and people interested in venture capital can always start doing.
It's interesting talking with Les as he was talking about how you get into venture capital. What are some things you want to keep in mind? That research piece, following the industry, what's going on these kind of calls. You might have somebody just ask you, well, what are you interested in right now? Is there any particular companies or anything emerging that you're following closely? So having a finger on the pulse, being able to answer that question, being plugged in, it has a practical value too. I guess that's kind of a way of sort of, well, how interested are you in this? Let's hear what you are following. It was interesting.
I have one very short plug for a great resource, but the Dorm Room Fund has podcasts, and they are like 15, 20-minute podcasts. So I'd recommend, if you're interested, listen to one of those episodes every day for a month, and then you will learn so much and have so much more confidence.
Well, I'm curious, Malcolm, are you planning to go to the Venture Capital Conference?
Oh, yes, I will be there.
All right. Well, what are you hoping to get out of the conference? What are you looking forward to?
Yeah, I mean, I think doubling down in a way on the many things that we've said here is I'm hoping to get learn a lot of things. I think looking at the list of people that'll be there, there's several individuals that I know are kind of experts in their field, know a lot about the space that they're in, and that we'll be talking a very large myriad of conversations where it'll be good to just sit and learn and get to hear from them about what's happening from their purview. But the second piece is networking. I was fortunate to have an internship at a venture fund up in the DC area at Sands Capital last year. And in being there, I got to know a lot of the people who are going to be at this conference. And so this is kind of one of those ways of keeping those relationships warm, having the opportunity to kind of reunite with them, hear what they're up to, let them know what I'm going to do after Darden. So they know where I am, I know what they're up to, and we can keep those conversations going so that hopefully down the road, if an opportunity presents itself, if there are chances where we can kind of work together on deals, then I have that relationship with them and they have that with me where there's a level of trust and knowing one another. And I think this conference is just a great way not only to nurture that existing relationship, but also grow it with new individuals that I haven't had the chance to meet yet, but hopefully will this weekend.
And Sands Capital are our next door neighbors here in Roslyn. They're in the 1000 building here at Wilson Boulevard. We're at 1100 and Sands Family Grounds, Sands Capital Management. Yes, there's a connection between those two things. So, Ellie, how about you? Are you planning to go to the Venture Capital Conference?
Of course, I'm really excited about it.
What are you looking forward to getting out of the conference?
So, along with what Malcolm said, I am very excited to continue to make connections with the industry, connections with alumni in the industry. But I think probably my perspective is a bit different going in as a founder who will hopefully fundraise at the end of summer. So, looking to make connections for those purposes, and then also just grow my knowledge base for a founder looking to raise money.
All right. Well, a couple more questions for you as we wrap up here. Malcolm, did you come to Darden knowing that you wanted to do something VC related? Was that a focus for you?
It was. I was in the asset management before out west in the Silicon Valley area. And so I hit a point in my time there. I was doing product management on the client side of the company. And simply put, I started having conversations with some of our investment team, and I was asking somewhat silly questions of why do they keep asking questions about interest rates from our clients and whatnot. And they were like, you don't have an economics and finance background, do you? And I, of course, had to say no. And so coming to get my MBA, part of it was to bridge that gap of my experience and knowledge on the client side with the economics and finance background of getting an MBA, and then take that so that I could move and pivot from more of a client focused role to more of an investing side role, which is what I'm doing now, and hopefully find a way over the next few years to bridge that experience. Because from my knowledge and learning and mentors in my life, a lot of them have said to be a better investor, you have to understand the importance of a client. To be a better client service member, you have to understand the importance of the nuances of investing. But if you can bridge the two of those, you can have a really good career in the space. And so I wanted to come in and go into kind of the venture or private or asset management space on the investing side so I could find a pathway to kind of merging those experiences for myself.
All right. Do you know what you're doing after graduation? Still working on that?
I do. So I will be working for Brown Advisory, being an associate portfolio manager for them. And I fortunately will get to stay right here in Charlottesville as they've just expanded and opened a new office down here. So I'm excited for that and really looking forward to working with the team and growing my own knowledge and network in the space.
All right. Well, congratulations. Elliot, I wonder, did you come to Darden with an interest in venture capital? Is that something that emerged during your time here?
No, I came in with an interest in venture. I also, like Malcolm, was in the Bay Area prior to school, and I worked for two venture-backed startups, and so had just a high interest in the space and was excited to learn more. Similar to Malcolm, I also wanted to develop my background in finance and accounting and other things that are like econ that would really benefit my knowledge base and growth in the space. But I also really wanted to start a business. So I was fortunate enough to really grow my interest here in both venture and in entrepreneurship. And so it's been a really incredible journey.
I want to check in about that business. There's a recent Darden Report story about Play Henry. You and your partner, Grace Collins, were featured there. How are things going with Play Henry? What's the latest update? We had you several months ago on the podcast. I'm sure there's been a lot of news and developments since then.
Yes, absolutely. We were so fortunate to be featured on UVA Today last week. It was a really great and exciting article. The update is that Grace and I are taking on Play Henry full time after graduation. We'll be running and operating the company from Charlottesville, most likely through the end of summer and potentially into the next year. And with that, we're looking to fundraise towards the end of summer. So that's another exciting step in this journey.
Yeah, pickleball still the fastest growing sport in the United States. Is that still true?
That is true. And also, the fastest growing demographic within the sport is our age group. So 18 to 32, fastest growing and continuing to grow.
All right. Well, for folks who haven't heard that first episode, tell us a little bit more about Play Henry, what it's focused on, and where people can learn a bit more about the company if they're curious.
Absolutely. So Play Henry is a pickleball paddle company and lifestyle company. Our long-term vision is to grow into apparel. And so, over the next year, we're hoping to launch our pickleball apparel lines. But for now, we do paddles. We have our retail branded paddles, which are featured a monochrome white and black paddle. And then we also have the UVA branded paddle as we're a collegiate licensee. Another one of our offerings that's become quite popular is our custom paddle offering. We do custom paddles for corporate orders, corporate gifting, weddings, bachelorette parties, major events, anything of that nature. And so, yeah, stay tuned. We're excited for what the next year and beyond will bring. And check us out. Our website is playhenry.com, and our Instagram is at @shopPlayHenry.
All right. Pickleball revolution. It continues. Malcolm, final question for you here. Any final thoughts, any advice for our prospective student listeners who are tuned in this episode, curious about what we've talked about here today?
Yeah, I think the final thought I'd have is don't think that this is not a space that you can enter or go into just because currently it might not have a lot of people that look like you in it. I think that for me, having spent a lot of time out in Silicon Valley when I was deciding to come back and get my MBA, there was a part of me that wasn't sure that I could find success and move up in the asset management space and find a career there because I looked around and I didn't see a lot of African Americans. There's a historical trend there not being a lot of women in the space and not receiving a lot of funding, which is again why Ellie, being a founder of her company and the work she's doing, is just incredible to watch. I'm so excited for her. But I think that there's a lot of times that what it's going to take to kind of make more of these changes in the space and industry is actually more of us realizing and learning about venture capital and saying, I can do that too. And so I hope that people who look at the space and think it's interesting don't get in your own head, take the leap of faith, try and network into it, talk to people, reach out to people who have been in it and find ways, because it can be a really, really fun, entertaining, and also just really exciting space to learn and grow in. And I think it just takes a few more people to kind of think that this could be something we can do too.
Yeah, I love that advice. Don't count yourself out. And I think that also applies to so many people's MBA journeys. So many people think, oh gosh, I couldn't possibly do this. There's nobody like me, or my background is X. There's so many different kinds of people who can be successful at Darden or any MBA program. Certainly don't count yourself out. I love that advice. Ellie, final word of advice for our listeners who've been interested in today's conversation, curious to learn more?
Yeah, absolutely. I think really double down on relationship building. On top of what Malcolm said, which I think is incredibly important. Do not be intimidated by this industry. Really look towards people that you have a single connection with and ways that you can start introducing yourself to more and more people in this industry and learning more. But be relentless about relationship building and networking, and you will do just fine.
I love that. All right. Well, thank you both for all your insights and advice here today and for sharing your story. And I will just give another plug for folks who are interested in this conversation, a couple follow-up listens. Malcolm's episode here on the Experience Darden podcast, Ellie's episode as well, also on the Experience Darden podcast. Would also encourage you to check out the Les Alexander interview that we did that's shared on both the Experience Darden and the Exec MBA podcast. So thank you both. Have a wonderful Venture Capital Conference. So excited to have everybody here in Roslyn in just a few short days. And that was my conversation with Malcolm Stewart and Ellie Jameson, two second-year students in our full-time MBA class of 2024. As always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, anything like for us to cover here on the podcast, we're all ears. We can be reached at Darden, that's Darden, @virginia.edu. Till next time, stay safe, be well, and thanks for listening.